Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, Literary Aviatrix, and I'm excited for another episode of Literary Aviatrix Classics. Today, my co-hosts Dr. Jacque Boyd and Captain Jenny Beatty and I will be discussing Amy Johnson. We started with the book Sky Roads of the World, and just to give anyone who maybe doesn't have a solid grounding in who Amy Johnson was, I was going to take the liberty of reading basically the foreword of this book. It's Sky Roads of the World, Amy Johnson's story about her adventurous flying career. And you'll hear Jacque and Jenny and me talk all about that in our conversation. But for those of you who don't know Amy, you can get to know her with this little opening from the book. Amy Johnson was born on 1st July 1903, the eldest of John and Amy Johnson's 4 daughters. She grew up in Hull, Great Britain, where her father ran a prosperous fishing business. In 1922, Amy went to Sheffield University, where she graduated 3 years later with a bachelor's degree in economics. Afterwards, she returned to Hull and worked briefly at 2 local offices. But in 1927, she decided to move to London to find better opportunities. Amy moved into a YWCA hostel and began to look for work. She took a brief job as a shop assistant before starting work as a secretary for a law firm. A year later, Amy decided to take up flying, but was initially put off because of the expense. However, one day she decided to take a bus ride to Stag Lane Aerodrome, and there she learned that she could join the club and learn to fly at a fraction of the cost given to her by the local flying school. She had to wait through a 5-month waiting list and eventually took her first lesson on 15 September 1928. Amy Johnson made her first solo flight on 9 June 1929, but as things began to look up at the aerodrome, her supervisor and the law firm gave her an ultimatum that she must either quit her job or quit flying. A month later, Amy's father agreed to her request for financial support, and Amy quit the law offices. During her time at the aerodrome, Amy had also been learning about aircraft mechanics and eventually became the first woman in Britain to earn a ground engineer's license. The idea to fly solo to Australia came to Amy as she was eager to earn publicity both for aviation and for herself, hoping that it would lead to job offers. Bert Hinkler's 1928 record flight from England to Australia still stood, and no woman had yet attempted to challenge it. Amy decided to take the plunge and started looking for a sponsor, but her many appeals to wealthy potential backers proved fruitless until March 1930, when her plea for assistance to Sir Sefton Brinker, the director of civil aviation, had a positive response. He wrote to aviation benefactor Lord Wakefield of Wakefield Oil on her behalf, and on April 1930, Lord Wakefield met with Amy Johnson and agreed to provide the necessary backing for her challenging flight. Amy's father had already agreed to provide £500. A suitable plane was eventually found. It was a 2-year-old de Havilland Moth, already fitted with extra fuel tanks, and she christened it Jason after the registered trademark of her father's fish business, and had it painted green with silver lettering. On 24 May 1930, after flying 8,600 miles from London in 19 and a half days, Amy arrived in Australia to great fanfare, there and in Britain. Her return to England on 4 August brought even more publicity. The Australia trip was Amy's finest hour, although she later made record-breaking flights, namely to Japan in 1931, to Cape Town in 1932, and again in 1936 to Cape Town. But long-distance stunt flying was becoming familiar, and the most noteworthy obstacles had been conquered by then. Amy Johnson and the fellow aviator Jim Mollison married in July 1933. Jim was a playboy, a womanizer, and a heavy drinker. They tried to keep their careers and marriage going with joint flights and solo endeavors, but Jim's infidelities, absences, and too much press drove the couple apart. They divorced in 1938, and Amy resumed her maiden name. Amy's passion for flying cooled after learning that her friend Amelia Earhart had disappeared while flying over the Pacific Ocean in 1937. Money was tight, and she tried to live a quiet lifestyle in the country. Amy took up gliding and became an ardent supporter of the sport. When World War II erupted, Amy wanted to contribute to the war effort, and in 1940 she joined the Air Transport Auxiliary, delivering military aircraft from factories to air bases. On Sunday, 5 January 1941, Amy took off from the Blackpool Aerodrome in a twin-engine Airspeed Oxford and headed for Kidlington Air Base in Oxfordshire. According to the newspaper accounts, she was not seen again until 4 hours later when she parachuted out of her plane over the icy waters of the Thames estuary. She ditched her plane near a convoy of British ships. Sailors threw lines to her, but she couldn't grasp them. The ship HMS Haslemer's commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Walter Fletcher, tried to help her, but succumbed to the cold and lost consciousness before his body was picked up. Amy's body was never found. The mystery of her death led to many stories in the press about the causes of her disappearance, but whatever the circumstances of her death, nothing can diminish what Amy Johnson accomplished as a pioneer aviator through her iron will and sheer determination to succeed. Her legend was thus born. Fewer than 10% of pilots and aircraft mechanics are women. These are their stories of tenacity, adventure, and courage. Stories with the power to inspire, heal, and connect. Welcome to the Literary Aviatrix community, where we leverage the power of story to build and celebrate our community and inspire the next generation of aviation. Jacque Boyd and Jenny Beatty, welcome back.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us again.
Oh my gosh. And here we are. Happy New Year. It's June, almost.
Almost.
And we are just getting around to this. So we decided that we were going to talk about Amy Johnson. And I was excited about that for a few reasons. I was doing some books in the book club, one of which I have behind me, which is Solo to Darwin in the Footsteps of Amy Johnson. And we have another one coming up later this year, Bird, with another lady who has followed some of Johnson's routes in her open air biplane. So I was excited to learn who this Amy Johnson person was. And so we picked a book by Amy Johnson, Sky Roads of the World. Very misleading subtitle is Amy Johnson's story about her adventurous flying career. Okay, I was so excited to read it. And we were scheduled to discuss this on April 5th? No, May 5th. May 5th. And May 5th was the day that she took off from Croydon Fields in the UK to make her record-setting solo flight to Australia. So that felt very auspicious to have our conversation on the same day. And then Jacque, who lives in the middle of nowhere, got snowed in May, people, and lost power, and we had to cancel. And it was a good thing, too, because we unanimously decided that we hated this book.
It's not a memoir.
It's not.
No.
And
it's a wonderful history of, oh my
Sure.
golly, if you want to know anything about the British Empire during the 1930s, it's wonderful. But
And how to
tell
fly
me
there.
anything about Amy Johnson.
No.
And so the main title is relevant. It is
Of
about
course.
Sky Roads of the World, you know?
Yeah, no, it is.
But
the subtitle, at least on the cover that I have, is a lie.
True.
Yes.
It's a lie. She does. So that's not entirely true. So about 85% of the book is this very meticulous history of what had happened to date, the potential for aviation to cure all kinds of ills in the world, to bring civilization to the savages. I mean, this is her language, of course, to, move cargo around the world, get people on holiday, all of those things. It's a great accounting of both, what had happened to date and what people were imagining aviation would do, and a lot of which came true, right? Yeah. And then there are a couple of passages where she actually talks about herself.
But she even predicted, for example, talking about the future, the shortening times between flying from one place to another, for one thing, but also like the need for entertainment for passengers on long flights. It's like, yeah,
I know. Isn't that
that?
Yeah. Well, so I got nothing about Amy from that book though, and I really like the whole point was I kind of wanted to get to know what the whole, what was the big deal about Amy. So
Yeah.
I pulled out my Midge Gillies biography of her, Amy Johnson, Queen of the Air, Midge Gillies, and I haven't finished it. Full disclosure, I'm still working on it, and I'm excited to finish it. But it has given me a much better understanding of sort of what was behind the curtain with Amy, like, what motivated her to fly, kind of how she reacted to her interpersonal relationships, and that's the juicy stuff that I want to know about these people. Like that's what I
Right.
want to know. So yeah, so we're gonna just kind of what we would normally do. You've
Oh,
got
and
her.
there's one more
Yeah.
biography.
Well, I'm gonna let you bring out all the books, girl. So that's the Amy Johnson Constance Babington Smith biography, which I have not read yet. So we're going to talk about all of this stuff. So what we would normally do, or what we have been doing, is we've been going chapter by chapter in these books that are really interesting and that give us something. We're not going to do that today. So Jackie, I know you have some things to say about Amy. Normally you would give us sort of a grounding in her place in history, why she is important. Do you want to give us that? Are you ready to do that?
And see, this is one of those where I have an attitude. so,
Well, bring
so,
it.
There was a long pause
self-admittedly,
there.
I have an attitude, and I, I think, I mean, she definitely what she did, flying where she did in a tiger moth, for heaven's sakes. There is absolutely nothing that can take away from that kind of accomplishment. But I'm going to blame this on Lettuce Curtis, because when we met, 25 years ago now, when I was working with the backstory of the American women who went to fly for the British during World War II, I met Lettuce. And as an aside, she's the one who looked at me and said, "And how many hours do you have in a Spitfire?" And I said, "Well, I have 8,000 hours, but I don't have any hours in a Spitfire." And she looked at me and said, "Oh, how terribly unfortunate." And she turned around and walked away.
Oh
And,
my.
and it's like, excuse me. But she had,
That's gonna be my new conversation with people about tail wheels. And how many hours do you have in a tail dragger? With all like 9.5 of mine. Now.
You know what, Liz? You could do that with helicopter too. I'm just
Oh, yeah.
telling you.
absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry.
But as a contemporary of Johnson, even during the 30s, there she she had an attitude about Amy Johnson, and it not about her flying by any means during the 30s, because that Johnson did some phenomenal things. She absolutely took an airplane that was so elemental at the time and did spectacular things with it. And I don't think anything I read after would ever take that away. But I guess, and I'm kind of jumping around a bit, because my real emphasis on her was right around the early 40s with the ATA. And I think she had reached a point in her career after her divorce from James Mallinson and taking that coupleness away from her travels and her flying, I think she was searching for the next thing to come, her next flight. And she was misled a bit because she thought she was going to be able to be the commander of the women's division of the ATA. And instead, Pauline Gower was appointed. And a lot of the books didn't mention it. Gower's did. Even Constance Babington Smith's book didn't give a full accounting of Amy Johnson's friendship with Pauline Gower. And so I think she was looking for the next thing to come. She was, in my estimation, she was doing a little searching. And so that truly influenced where I went with her when we figured out that the book we started with was not a memoir, and I kept wanting to know who she was, because I knew just on the surface, not underneath.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where I went with this whole thing.
Well, great. Then we can come back to that after we kind of maybe talk a little bit about her earlier life and
Right.
the things that she did accomplish that sort of were that made her name initially. And Jenny has a stack of books, and I know Jacque, you might have books that you want to call out too. But let's do the book thing. Let's start with that.
Well, obviously I'm starting with the Amy Johnson books. So Sky Roads of the World. This is a first edition by Amy Johnson. I don't have it. And when I got it, it was sent to me from England. It came with some newspaper clippings in it and an original receipt.
Oh, that's cool.
It cost, no, the second person who bought it in 1998, how much they paid the original, anyway, I won't tell you how much we paid. But you can buy a first edition now. I did look it up for about $130, but then you're going to pay a good $30 or something for it to be shipped from England to the United States if you did that. And again, all the caveats about that book about why you might or might not want to buy it.
Right.
And especially this is the same book. It's literally the same book, but with a short introduction about her. And they added this subtitle.
Yep.
Which is very misleading, as Liz said. Yep. And also it's very poorly printed and bound. Yeah. I mean, like, this is the worst piece of crap. I'm sorry. and in the middle of the book, it's like it went 3 pages into a chapter and then it started that chapter over. I don't know. It was just a terrible printing. It's like, I don't know if it's print on demand, but it's, I demand a new printing. I'm sorry. That's my definition of it. But you can get this, for, I don't know, $12 or $13 if you care to read it. And then the entire book is in there. So don't worry. Yeah. And does it have any, it didn't have any pictures. Is that right? No photos. The next book that was, that I happen to have that was published about her came out in 1966. Yeah. And it's called Winged Victory by Elizabeth Gray. And it is what I would call a short biography. So it's not that long, but it does have sort of the salient parts of her story. And it is not as, not as in depth and doesn't bring out perhaps all of the juicy details. I'll use that term. That the next book does, which is a really thorough biography by it's called Amy Johnson, and it's by Constance Babington Smith, who did a lot of research and
exceptional
primary
journalist.
Research and a lot of interviews. I'm sorry, Jacque?
She was an exceptional journalist.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the final biography, Amy Johnson, Queen of the Air by Midge Gillies, it draws quite a bit off of the prior book by Constance Babington Smith, but it's also very good. And these have photos and a lot of primary research. And I want to add to something that Jackie, began to talk about earlier, or maybe it was you, Liz. I apologize. One of you were saying that Amelia Earhart gave all sorts of talks and wrote all sorts of articles, and that those are a really good basis for us to understand Amelia Earhart and what she thought about herself, when she did write about herself.
Right.
And what we have from Amy Johnson that's clear from these two biographies is she wrote letters.
Right.
And boy, kind of eye-opening.
Correct.
What you learn from those letters. And they are what are you holding up, Jackie?
James Mollinson's.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have his book. So he wrote a memoir.
He did not write this one, but a lot of her letters are quoted in it.
Aha.
But even letters from her childhood are in some of the other two biographies.
Right.
I mean, there were a lot of letters. And so it would be the equivalent of today of someone going through your entire social media history and everything, what you had for breakfast and who you saw, because that's what was written in these letters. And the recipients saved them and then shared them. So it's amazing that, but that's how we know Amy Johnson as far as her insights about her and what she wrote about herself and her own activities, because she didn't write that in a memoir.
Right.
And it was left to her biographers to find those letters and the recipients and family to share the letters, the family, ex-husband, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the book review about books about Amy Johnson.
Right. And then we talked about maybe placing Amy and her accomplishments. So the things that were enlightening to me, and again, I haven't gotten all the way through. I generally know, the summary of her life and her involvement in the ATA and this marriage, that those are the parts that I haven't gotten to personally. You guys can talk more about. But just thinking about her early life and sort of her path to aviation in the Midge Gillies book, I thought it was very revealing about what kind of person she was, especially in this relationship that she was having with this guy early on, that we get to do. I mean, we get to some personal details here. And we also kind of get to know what kind of person she is through that. And I thought it was interesting how her emotional or lack thereof reaction to the loss of her sister, kind of jump started her really wanting to do something big. It felt like, she just, I guess, whatever. I'm not a psychologist. I can't analyze what was going on with her, but clearly she just needed to do something big. And so that was kind of illuminating, to kind of have that context of what was driving her in that exact time frame when she was getting into aviation. And I also thought that this relationship that she had with her mechanic was an interesting one.
Yeah. And that cannot be overlooked, because it wasn't even, a relationship with her mechanic, is that she went. So part of what I wanted to talk about, which I will, whenever you want to fit it in, is that in my view, when I look at, and I've looked into the history of women pilots way back, and I kind of put them into two categories. Okay. There's the women who are either born to a lot of wealth or marry a lot of wealth. And so then it's like, well, I'm going to get an airplane and learn to fly. And, so you could put Ruth Nichols in that category, Pancho Barnes. Later, Jackie Cochran earned money and then married great wealth. And there's them. And I'm going to talk about some of those ladies in England a little bit. But then there are the others who were not born to wealth, didn't marry wealth, and they had to scramble because they wanted to fly. So definitely Bessie Coleman is in that category.
Right.
And Amelia Earhart's in that category. And Amy Johnson is in that category.
Right.
And they had to work to earn the money for flying lessons, and they had to scramble for sponsorship. Yeah. And that's important to know. The other thing, so back to the mechanic part of it, was here she was working as a secretary and wanting to do flying lessons and was learning to fly and paying for those lessons. But she, on her own, without paying, but also without being paid, went to the hangar and asked to be taught to all the mechanics on these airplanes. And because she was so diligent, because she showed up every day before work and then again after work, never asking for money, helping out at the shop, Jacque took her under his wing and taught her. And she got her C mechanics license. Sorry, in the United States, we call it mechanic, but there the term is ground engineer. So she got her ground engineer C license, which was to work on power plants. And then later and then only a couple months later, she got her ground engineer A license, which was to work on the airframe. And that's huge. That's huge.
Yeah.
And that was a key to her success on these flights as well.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I was so impressed by that. And obviously, like, oh gosh, we talked about our girl who taught Amelia to fly. Remember her?
Nita Snook.
Nita Snook, who was in the hangar working on the plane that they were trying to fly, right? And I just feel like those women just endeared themselves to their male counterparts, period, and like earned their respect and admiration through. Yeah, they weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Jackie, do you have things you want to talk about, just sort of leading us into her getting involved in aviation?
Not particularly. I kind of like where this is going.
Yeah. Okay. So there's the setup. So we have a woman who starts learning to fly, and literally, like, how long had she been flying before she decided to do this Australia thing? I mean, like, I feel like it was like she was only months into it.
It was her plan even before she was learning to fly, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean,
it was right.
It's so interesting because that's kind of what Jean Batten did too. Like, no, I'm going to do this thing and then I'm going to learn how to fly to do it. It's just really weird. So I do have a couple dates. She began showing up at the Stag Lane Aerodrome in London. And her first flying lesson was in 1928. She soloed in June of 1929 and got her Pilot A license, which was equivalent to our private pilot license, July 6th, 1929. And then 1929 and 30, simultaneously working on her ground engineer licenses. She departed Croydon on May 5th, 1930.
Yeah.
So it was less than a year later after getting her private pilot's license, the equivalent of. Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So one of the other things that you did, Jenny, when you were so we kind of had like a little pregame before we started recording, just kind of talking about when we decided that this book wasn't enough for us, the Sky Roads wasn't enough, and we wanted to kind of triangulate a little better on who Amy was. You both kind of went in these directions, Jackie. Like you kind of focused on the ATA days, but Jenny, you have some context to give us around Amy at the time with her contemporaries.
Right, and because partly it was a question of why is Amy Johnson to this day, it seems like, why is she considered to be the premier woman pilot of England and Britain? And so that was a question that I had. And I'm also interested in the context in aviation of the environment of aviation that she entered in 1928 and 1929. So I went back and I pulled a lot of books off my shelves, and I've kind of been doing some cramming these last couple of days.
I love it.
Because I knew some names, but I didn't know details, and like who came first, and who was doing what when, and who was doing what when Amy showed up on the scene. That was kind of the question I had in my mind. So I want to just do a quick review, and if I go on too long, just like say, "Hey, Jenny, cut."
Oh no, we're your students. We are listening to this wonderful lecture that you've prepared for us.
Okay, so here's the lecture. So one of the first women pilots in what is now the United Kingdom is Gertrude Bacon, who her father was a balloon pilot. It's unclear if she flew as a pilot herself. The terms are a little bit loose back in those days, but she did fly in a balloon. She flew in an airplane. She flew in a seaplane, and she flew in an airship. She joined the Royal Aeronautical Society in 1905, and just she's known as this tremendous aeronaut of early United Kingdom. The next most amazing woman is Hilda Hewlett, who first went to art school, where she learned metalwork, woodwork, and stitchery. And she married, had a couple kids, separated from her husband, went to France to learn aeronautics, like you do, and bought an airplane there, brought it back. And with a gentleman who was also a pilot, who was a pilot, they launched a flying school. She learned to fly. She later taught her son to fly. So she's considered to be the first woman flight instructor of England. I forgot to give a year. She began flying in 1910 and opened this flying school in 1911 and taught a bunch of people to fly. It was one of the first times, I forget his first name, is it Gustav Sopwith flew? That sop, as in the Sopwith camel. So a lot of people touched this flying school. Well, then they opened a aircraft manufacturing plant, and she managed it. They were producing up to 10 types of aircraft. And then when World War I came, they ended up producing 800 aircraft for England for World War I. So
wow,
amazing, right? The next woman I have on my list, Dulcibella Clifford, also known as Mrs. Oliver Atke. So I'm going to pause for a moment to talk about names. It's very frustrating as women, researching women, that women change their names when they marry. And then sometimes they don't when they divorce, or they do, or then they remarry and their name changes again. And I just needed to put that out there. There's another thing about names that's coming up in England or Great Britain is there's a lot of Marys coming up. So I had to work really hard to sort out which Mary is which. And that's in all of the world where Christianity is practiced. There's a lot of Marys and a lot of Marias. Okay. Just like there are a lot. But there was this little concentration here that's coming up. And then the third thing that's important, that when I talked earlier about how there were women who scrambled to become pilots and to get the money and everything to fly, then the really wealthy people women who born to wealth or married wealth and flew. And when we're talking about Great Britain and the United Kingdom, people with wealthy, they are in the peerage. Right. So all three of us are American. This is a little bit foreign to me. I don't know if it's foreign to the two of you. It's something that we're not used to dealing with or talking about on a day-to-day basis. But my understanding of it is there's royalty, then there's the peerage, then there's the hoi polloi, the rest of us. And I'm going to interject right here. So kind of jumping ahead, but I think this is why Amy Johnson is revered, because she was from the hoi polloi. She was not from the peerage, because now I'm about to talk about 4 women with titles. Well, anyway, but before I get there, so there was Dulcibella Clifford, Mrs. Oliver Atke, who learned to fly in 1919. Then a woman named Elsie Mackay, sorry, it's pronounced Mackay, who learned to fly in 1923. She was an actress, and there's others references. And in the United States, it was true too, where actresses, to get publicity, they would go and take flying lessons, and the media would be there. And it was just again, about social influencing and getting more clicks, as it were, in the day. But she was very serious about her flying. And unfortunately, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but later, some of these big, long flights that people made were a big deal, obviously, and important to advance aviation and show what aviation could do. But the big milestone is crossing the Atlantic. So I might be jumping ahead, but I will say Elsie Mackay was part of a crew. She and a pilot departed England in 1928, attempting to fly across the Atlantic. And they were never seen again. And that was not uncommon. So that's Elsie Mackay. Then we get to Mary Lady Heath. She was born Sophie Catherine Teresa Mary Pierce Evans. Her first husband's surname was hyphenated, so she became known as Mrs. Sophie Elliott Lynn.
Oh, my word.
And Elliott Lynn being a hyphenated surname. And some of what she accomplished as a pilot, which I'll talk about briefly, she did under that name. But then she divorced that guy. Eleanor Smith in the United States was a friend of hers. and divulged a lot about her, which is pretty eye-opening. And one of them, the things that Eleanor, I don't know, maybe I'm giving too much away because we might talk about her later, but I'll just say her next husband was a Lord Heath. And so her name became Lady Heath. And then, of course, now that she's a lady, she used that name. And so then she's known as Lady Heath. And I'm going to pull out a couple books about her. Hold on. She, along with Stella Wolfe Murray, wrote Woman and Flying. And they kind of alternated chapters. About half of it is written by Stella Wolfe Murray. When did this book get produced? Sorry, 1929. This book's from 1929. And then Lady Heath talks a great deal about her flights. She made some flights that cross paths with Amy Johnson. So that's her own writing. But this book, written by Lindy Naughton, is Lady Icarus, The Life of Irish Aviator Lady Mary Heath. I forgot to say she's Irish. I forgot to say that because there's 3 women from Ireland that I'm going to be talking about here. I don't have you on my screen, so I can't tell if it's showing. So she competed in the Cleveland Air Races in 1929, and she was a charter member of the 99s. I don't want to talk more about her because who knows, we may talk about her in our book classics, but she was a very colorful woman, as you may have already gathered. Then there was a woman, and it's difficult for me to know how her first name is pronounced. It might be Cicely, but it's got an unusual spelling, unusual to me. It's Sicele, Cicely O'Brien, also born in Ireland, came to England and learned to fly in 1925. And then there's Mary Lady Bailey. I'm going to pause for a moment to show a particular book.
Yes. This one I know.
Okay, so this is volume 1 of a 2-volume set. Look how thick it is.
They are wonderful books.
These are amazing books.
The title is?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Petticoat Pilots, Biographies and Achievements of Irish Female Aviators. This one's from 1909 to 1939. That's just volume 1. And the author is Michael Traynor. These are so comprehensive. They have like family trees and genealogy going back generations before the individual is even born. It has photographs of the castle or home they were built in and maps, and it covers their life literally cradle to grave, except even before the cradle. These are amazing books. So the next woman who's also a Mary is also born in Ireland, and that's Mary Lady Bailey. And we may not talk more about her elsewhere. She I think she was born to some wealth, but then she married a very wealthy South African man. She learned to fly in 1926. She went on some of these long flights in around Africa. In fact, Lady Heath and Lady Bailey crossed paths flying between Cape Town, South Africa, and London at the same time in circa 1929, I think it is. So there was a lot of activity, and Amy Johnson hasn't even touched an airplane yet. Then we get to Mary, Duchess of Bedford. So she was born to an archdeacon. She was actually, they were off in India. She spent part of her childhood in India. She met and married a man from the peerage, and then that man's father died, and his older brother became the Duke of Bedford. But then his older brother died without any offspring. So then he became the Duke of Bedford. So she became the Duchess of Bedford. And somewhere in here, there's a photo. But I mean, when you look at the ducal home, it's difficult to overemphasize how large this is. This is, if you've seen it, being American, if you've seen, what are the amazing, movies that it's just like,
Downton Abbey.
Like Downton Abbey, and it's like beyond. Yeah. And huge acreage, and he had, all this cattle. He even had bison and then a whole other piece of property. And so he did build an airstrip and a hangar for her when she took up flying, which she did in 1960. Which she did when she was 61 years old. that's when she caught the flying bug. And of course, like you do, then you just buy an airplane, which she bought a Fokker 7, which is a tri-motor, and then hired her personal pilot to fly her around, fly her between the different properties in London, and then flew her all the way to India, like you do. And a couple years later, she herself learned to fly. And I won't go more into it because we may cover her in a later episode.
Yeah,
But I want to talk about then 2 books, though, that are about the Duchess of Bedford. So this first one is a biography. It's called The Flying Duchess, and it's by John, Duke of Bedford. He is 2 generations down. He is her grandson. And it is drawn quite a bit from her personal diary. Then there is this book, which is wonderful and maybe more accessible to many people. It's called The Winged Odyssey, Mary, Duchess of Bedford, a flying biography by Lettice Curtis. And it also draws off of her diary, but it has some more biographical information too. Very interesting character. So then there was one more who learned to fly, literally took her first flying lesson the day after Amy Johnson completed her flight to Australia. But I want to mention her because she's also just another wealthy person. And her name originally was Mildred Mary Peter, but she married Mr. Victor Bruce. So she was known as Mrs. Victor Bruce in almost all the works. And she bought an airplane and immediately decided to fly around the world, like you do. And she wrote a book about it. So she did that in 1930, wrote a book about it, produced in 1931, called The Bluebird's Flight. And that was the name of her airplane. Now, she did fly solo around the world in 1930 and 31, but not across the oceans. So she folded up the wings, put it on a ship, and shipped it across the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay.
But otherwise, she did fly it and flew it solo.
Wow.
There's 2 other books. This one is also her memoir. So that was a memoir, and this is also her memoir. The Honorable Mrs. Victor Bruce, 9 Lives Plus, record-breaking on land, sea, and in the air. I forgot to say she raced cars, like literally at Monte Carlo and everything else, and raced motorcycles. I forgot to mention some of these other women also were nutso on motorcycles and cars, like racking up speeding tickets in the very early days, like literally 3 of the women that I just mentioned. Yeah, it all goes together. There's one more book then about Mrs. Victor Bruce. So this is A Passion for Speed, The Daring Life of Mildred, the Honorable Mrs. Victor Bruce by Paul Smitty.
Yes, I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, so those are all about her. And again, she came kind of simultaneous or right after Amy Johnson. I want to throw out just a couple more names who were flying around that time of Amy in England, right there, even at the same airport. Dorothy Spicer, Pauline Gower. Okay. And then in 1930, Jean Batten, who was from New Zealand, but then came to London and learned to fly. We've already discussed Jean.
Yeah.
And just to, again, place her then in the larger context of women pilots flying. Now, Amelia Earhart had learned to fly long earlier, as you know. She flew across the Atlantic as a passenger in 1928. Mm-hmm. It was a very large thing in aviation when she flew solo 5 years later in 1932, flew across the Atlantic solo. Yeah. And all these other women pilots were already flying. Louise Thaden, Ruth Nichols, Phoebe Omley, Eleanor Smith, Bobby Trout. They were already flying. A couple who came later, but kind of come into her life a little bit, touch on her life, are Beryl Markham, who's from Africa, but came to England, and she learned to fly in 1931. And then Jacqueline Cochran, who learned and fly and mostly flew in the United States, she learned to fly in 1932. But she entered an air race that Amy Johnson and her husband, Jim Mollison, had also entered. And that's where they kind of crossed paths a few years, 1934. So that's kind of all the books that I wanted. Oh, I realized I forgot to bring up one book. I should have brought this book up at the very beginning, because if you want to learn about the very first women to Fly. So this is where I learned about like Hilda Hewlett
It's a
and some of the
great
others.
book.
This is the book.
What's the book?
It is called Before Amelia, Women Pilots in the Early Days of Aviation, and it's by Eileen F. LeBeau. And this book, heavily researched, and it talks about the very first women to fly in many nations around the world. And there are many more of them than you might know, because they didn't become as well known as, your Amy Johnson, or certainly not as well known as Amelia Earhart or some of the others. But they were licensed to fly in the very earliest days of flying, and I mean in the 1900s and the 1910s. So this is a really, really good book if that interests you. So there's my book review. Except to say, just to go back to what I was saying, where, you asked Jacque about the impact of Amy Johnson. And I was thinking about that question about why, why did Amy, or how did Amy become the premier woman pilot of Great Britain? And I think it's for two reasons. One, because she was an ordinary person,
Right.
as an ordinary woman, not a wealthy woman, but an ordinary woman who was determined to fly. And then A. So that's A. B, did this tremendous flight to Australia, which is just eye-opening.
Yeah.
And that's what made her famous, and why she was so embraced by all the flying public. So, and then later, I think them holding her in their hearts over the years and decades and years is because she was lost in a similar way that Amelia Earhart was lost, which, some of the other women, when you live to be 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, and you're not flying and you're not accomplishing things anymore, it's just more time for you to end up like, oh, I don't want to mention which one, but, turn into an alcoholic and is arrested for alcoholism, and falls on a bus, where your record gets tarnished.
Yeah.
And so you're almost, sorry to say, lucky if you fly at the peak of your career or right after, if you die, because the peak of your fame, it's never, your star's not going to get dimmed by later events.
Right.
So.
No, yeah, I think that's what I took away from, like, how does this woman become sort of this icon in the way that Amelia has in the United States, and how does that reputation live on? And I think unfortunately it's the dying young, but also dying in the service of her country. She was doing something very patriotic, and so easy to put her there, no matter what her quirks or what skeletons were in her closet. So yeah. So
Which brings us to
well, what does it bring us to? Please dish.
Jacque,
you're up.
It's one of those two where I don't think we give enough credit for the celebrity of the time, and the race car drivers and the pilots. There was this mystique of celebrity. And in reading the biographies that talk about her wedding to Jim Mollinson, and it was a celebrity thing. You could almost hear the camera flash bulbs going off.
Right.
I think that too is one of those, and it wasn't as carefully crafted a celebrity as Putnam did for Earhart.
Right.
But there was a celebrity in that group. And I think when Johnson was married to Mollinson, and it is, I get back to the name thing too, you can see the change of, she is no longer Amy Johnson, she's Mrs. Mollinson. And that whole aspect is so fascinating about the time period. And I think for us reading these things now, putting it in the context of the time with the social stratus is really important.
Right.
And by the way, she went back to Johnson after divorcing Mollison. And I also want to interject just to note, since we're talking about names, after Amelia Earhart married George Putnam, she began to get referred to in the press as Mrs. George Putnam, and she asked not. And
Right.
there's a letter to Sulzenberger of the New York Times, as politely asking that they refer to her as Miss Amelia Earhart.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah, she definitely had her boundaries on that marriage thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so Mollison, what effect did that marriage have on her, and how did that play out?
I think both of them used it to their advantage. They became this golden couple who were both talented in their own rights, but I do think among other things, they used that relationship in a smart way. It was fascinating to read the descriptions of who he had a relationship with right up until the time he proposed to Amy Johnson. Fascinating little turn of events. But I think as a couple, as an aviation couple, they really used it to their advantage.
And then you mentioned, after they divorced, she was sort of searching for something to do. And does anyone remember what year that was?
They
Just
they divorced in 1937.
okay.
So it was really,
Okay.
and she died in 1939. So it was only a couple. Did I get
Yeah.
that right?
So yeah,
Six,
but
I
I
think.
was also thinking about Amelia went missing in 1937, and that really kind of shook her, it seemed, as well.
Yeah.
So she was divorced, and Amelia went missing, and the UK is, you know,
Gearing up for war.
gearing
Yeah.
up for war. And so that leads us to so talk a little bit, Jackie, about the ATA and what you know about whether she was or wasn't gonna be in charge, or whether she believed she should be in charge, all that stuff.
Well, from the things that I've read and Pauline Gower's book, A Harvest of Memories, it might have been the Babington Smith book, where she felt she was going to be given the command of the ATA, of the women's division of the ATA. And instead, Pauline Gower was chosen. And everything that I read, it sounded like they had a very firm friendship based in a lot of similarities. And so, even though I think Johnson was kind of caught off guard by that, and it took a while for her to join. And Gower, it seemed like Gower asked her right away to be part of it, but it took her a while. And it took her a while to really see the benefit of what she was going to do. There were comments made when, like I said, when I started that little aspect of it, I went to a lot of the other British women ATA pilots' biographies and memoirs, and looked up Johnson in the index just to see what they had written, and there was very little in between. They either didn't know her because the ATA setup was so much different than the WASP. They were in separate ferry pools, and they might not have ever had contact with each other. And so it was either they didn't know who she was, or they thought she was just wonderful, and not in a celebrity sort of way. She was approachable. She did her job. She didn't put on airs or pull her celebrity into it. And so it was either one or the other, which I also found fascinating. It's that gray area in between. But I think she truly did enjoy being in the ATA. And the accident, it was, well, let me grab Lettice Curtis's book, The Forgotten Pilots. This probably is one of the best books on the ATA because it's written a lot like who she was, very dry, very, very straight across. She was just a wonderful piece of work. They were going to have a celebration with the ATA for some specific reason, but then no one knew where Amy Johnson was. She had kind of literally disappeared, if there was radar, disappeared off the radar. She was supposed to have reported, and no one knew where she was. She didn't report in to Pauline Gower, as was the setup. And so no one knew where she was. And it says, when we reported, this is from Lettice's book, when we reported for work the next morning, there was a flap in progress. Amy Mollinson, or Amy Johnson as the papers called her, had, it seemed, been missing since the afternoon of the day before, and there were rumors that she had been bailing out over the Thames estuary. At the time, nobody knew where she had spent the previous night, and much telephoning was going on. And that was one of the things that started some of the rumors about her accident and her death. There are several reports that when they saw her, that she was reported to have bailed out of the aircraft. Then there was also a report that there was a passenger who bailed out of the aircraft. All that kind of muddies the waters because they had strict orders not to have passengers. And
Right.
have Johnson depart so much from the regulations was one of the things that surprised a lot of the other ATA women, and several of them mentioned that in their memoirs. So,
But did she really violate the rules? Because I thought it made it sound like she was ferrying a flight, and maybe they just weren't aware of what her orders had been.
they had to be aware of what her orders had been. Even Pauline Gower's book says the same thing, and questioned any kind of eyewitness saying there were two people who bailed out of the airplane. Questioned that immediately because that was forbidden. It wasn't a part of the process. So,
and then didn't they later surmise that what was appeared to be a second body in the water, which it was terrible weather, terrible waves, very terrible conditions, that it may have actually just been this large duffel or bag,
right,
and not a second
one of her
body, that there wasn't a
suitcases.
second person. There was not a second person with her in the aircraft.
Surmising, yes. And both of her duffels were found. So, and when Pauline,
wouldn't somebody have gone missing? I mean, like,
you
know,
would,
if there
you
was
would think, but
Well,
then,
there were conspiracy theories. See, so that's the
Right,
thing.
right.
And
Yeah.
so one of the conspiracy theories was that it was a German boyfriend.
Right.
I have never heard that.
That's
Well,
But
Yeah.
it,
But again, this is where, imaginations run wild. And I'm a
Right.
person who believes in, Occam's razor, that the most simplest explanation is the explanation.
Yeah.
and because she was such a celebrity, there was that shock, and a lot of the blurbs that I read wondered why she had been flying in weather that was that bad. And
Mhm.
Pauline Gower was the one who did testimony in the hearings afterwards, surmised that it had been due to icing because of the weather. And so it's one of those continual mysteries. But wasn't it like 2 or 3 years ago when they found wreckage?
Oh, I didn't hear about the wreckage being found.
And
But,
I
but
it's
it was, well, many years later, a gunner thought maybe he had accidentally shot her plane down, and he was told to keep quiet. And he only revealed it to his sister on his deathbed. But then that theory's been the theory's been shot down.
yeah.
Because his boat was not in the vicinity, in range to have been able to shoot her plane down. And so I think it still stands that, yeah, it was due to either fuel exhaustion or more likely icing,
Right.
that
And
then
it's
that she had to bail out. Yeah, it wasn't shot down.
it's
Mhm.
one of those where I think it caught a lot of people off guard because she was so experienced and had all these flights that were so much more dangerous, and in conditions that were so much different than flying at home, and it caught people off guard. But in Pauline Gower's book, I hadn't realized what a close friendship they had had until I reread her book. And Gower was the one who notified Johnson's parents of the
Mhm.
accident. And she was also the one who wrote the obituary that was in the Times. And it's revealing in a lot of ways. Miss Amy Johnson was known throughout the world for her many famous flights, but in her private life and as a person, she was less well known. I had the privilege of meeting her first in 1930, and during the years that followed, got to know her as a friend. Although I appreciated her brilliance as a pilot, the attributes which went to make her a character were to me more impressive than her wonderful feats in the world of aeronautics. Her physical courage as an aviator was undoubted. Her moral courage, her large-heartedness, and her sense of humor were only fully appreciated by her friends. In her private life, Amy Johnson was unassuming and entirely lacking in conceit. It is inevitable that someone as famous as she was should be coupled with many extravagant stories. Those who knew Amy Johnson intimately saw her as an ordinary human being, keen on her job, brilliantly successful, but always accessible. After her spectacular flight, when the world was at her feet, she could spare time to give encouragement, help, and advice to anyone who asked her. Many have been assisted, encouraged, and cheered by her. When she joined the Air Transport Auxiliary, she settled down to a new life with all the eagerness and enthusiasm of someone who obviously had her heart in her work and was anxious to do a good job for her country. The flying she was required to do was not spectacular, but it required steady application. Sometimes it was easy for one with her experience. At other times, her skills stood her in good stead. Whatever the circumstances, however she was feeling, the job was done, and the conscientious manner in which she carried out her duties was an inspiration to all those who worked with her. Amy Johnson is not only a loss to aviation, those who knew her have lost the type of friend who cannot be replaced.
It's lovely.
I rounded out my assessment of who she was after I read that. And I think it says so much about who she was and maybe why we don't have this memoir experience that we were all looking for in some of the other books.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Jackie. So you have treated our heroine very kindly throughout this conversation, but I did get the hint that you're not a huge fan of Amy Johnson. I wanted to know what brought that on for you. Why is that?
Well, I do. I think part of it was Lettuce Curtis's observations when I met her 25 years ago. And we talked about kind of the juxtaposition of Earhart and Johnson. And I think Curtis very much questioned why Johnson had gone out into the weather she had.
Okay.
And why, with all this expertise, that kind of thing. And it did kind of influence me because I'd not done much research then on who Amy Johnson was. And
So she was more sort of like judging her as a pilot, and as like her decision making in the context of her disappearance.
Absolutely.
Where she's being held up as a heroine, but she maybe could have made better decisions and not gotten herself into that situation.
Yes,
Yeah.
It was very much an analysis as a pilot, flying skills, not as a person. And then reading all the other memoirs and seeing that black and white, they either knew her, or they didn't know her. And then Gower's assessment and that obituary kind of rounded it out. I never felt that Amy Johnson was a showboat by any means.
Right.
But her behaviors and the way she approached things when she was married to Jim Mollinson were a little out there.
So one of the books even speculates, just speculation, that her parents were very concerned, of course, concerned for her safety on this first flight. She set out to fly all the way to Australia with very little flight training. But you touched on it earlier, Liz, that her sister had died by suicide.
Right.
And she and her sister apparently had kind of a pretty healthy sibling rivalry going on.
Yeah.
And also, Amy was devastated when this long-term boyfriend, who she was convinced in her own mind, was going to marry her, and didn't. He married somebody else and told her after the fact. And they had carried on quite a relationship, including a physical relationship.
Yeah.
And so the speculation is that perhaps her parents were not just concerned for her safety on this dangerous flight, but that she would go down with the flames of glory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And commit, I saw the word for the first time, herocide.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah.
Yes. And so all of their telegrams to her were entreaties to her to be very safe.
Yeah.
Now, and we know she had trained actually quite a bit, especially in mechanics, but she also benefited from luck in these long very long range flying over, through incredible conditions and, really difficult terrain, difficult weather, and difficult airports to be landing and taking off in. So there was some skill, a lot of gumption, and they really liked to use the word plucky with her. She had a lot of pluck, where I like to call it determination, and but some luck as well.
Yeah.
And it's almost like on that last flight,
her luck ran out.
I'm not really buying the suicide thing, but her luck ran out.
Right.
Her luck just ran out, as it did for others at different times.
Yeah. But I think for me, the thing that softened is probably the best word I can come up with. Because I had read so many things about Pauline Gower and the way she approached things, the way she dealt with the other women in the ATA as their commanding officer, that obituary really made an impression on me.
Because you give her a lot of credit. I mean, she has a lot of credibility with you, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And if she said it, then it must be true, kind of thing.
Well, because absolutely, that really sums it up.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and as the commanding officer who basically is responsible for this obituary or putting out an official press release or whatever, she could have, if she really didn't like or respect Amy Johnson, she could have put out kind of a BS thing that made her sound good, but not go into depth. And she didn't do that.
I don't think she would have written it.
That's my point.
Right.
I mean, that also the way she wrote it, she didn't have to write it that way. And so if she wrote it that way, then it was true.
Oh, I think it came from the basis of friendship and truly knowing who Johnson was even before, because they were contemporaries, but that kind of, it's always, I always question, what is it that piques my interest in something?
Mm-hmm.
And I look at my bookshelves and it's like, oh my golly, I have 4 feet of books about one person and then maybe 1 or 2 about someone else. And Amy Johnson was just never on my radar.
Interesting.
Which makes me wonder, why not? So this, and had I read the first book we chose with a different mindset, instead of looking for a memoir, reading it as looking for a history of the British Empire and aeronautics, it probably would have hit me differently. But this kind of brought me full circle in a lot of ways.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, it's been, I feel like I still have more to learn about her. I still want to keep reading these books. I definitely want to hit the Constance Babington biography of her. I love the summary of all the books that you gave us, Jenny, and the ones that you threw in there, Jackie. Like, this has been great for that.
And can we quote a little bit from her writing?
Do it. Yeah.
Okay. Because we've done that in the past, and I did pull some quotes.
Okay.
And so actually I have to choose between 2 longish passages.
This was from Skyways of the World, right?
Yes.
Or did you
Sky Roads of the World.
Skyward. Yeah.
So I'm going to read, it's a little bit lengthy. But it's a passage about flying in Africa, because later she flew to Cape Town in 1936. And so she says, this is an example of what an equatorial African aerodrome looked like in 1936. So imagine that this is you. Circling what must be the landing ground as it bears the signs of what was once evidently a white circle, you glide down to land. The landing area seems to be in the form of 2 runways crossing each other at right angles. The only difference between runways and the surrounding grass being that the prepared area is of lighter color, probably showing that the grass has been recently cut in Africa. However, Not only does recently mean many moons ago, but grass rose at a rate and to a height which would be at first delightful and then the despair of an English gardener. Bringing your machine into land, you find yourself sinking down and down into the recently mown grass until the wheels touch ground, and then you will see the grass closing over your head. Coming to a rest very quickly as the earth itself is as soft as a new plowed field due to the almost perpetual rains. You will wait for some sort of welcome. Nothing happens, and no interest whatever is shown in your landing, although, as you rightly guess, yours is the first plane to have landed there in months. Sitting quietly in the cockpit and feigning death is the best calculated way to bring out assistance with any degree of haste.
I love that line.
Then there's a little more I'm going to talk about the takeoff. She talks about some of the decision making that goes on into the takeoff, because this is a long cross country journey. So she talks about how heavy the airplane is now that it's fully fueled. So she says you become bogged down and the plane will not turn around into the wind. Summoning all the help available at last, you half lift, half force the wretched airplane to face the direction wanted. By this time, the wheels have dug enormous holes for themselves in the soft earth, and your machine has to be lifted bodily out and placed on firmer ground. At last, when you open up the throttle for the actual takeoff, with the engine roaring full blast, the wheels begin to slowly skid forward. Peering ahead through the thick grass, you mentally gauge how long it will take to lift the plane off the soggy ground. After sliding along half the runway you decide it is hopeless, you will never get off the ground with your load of petrol. Now what are you going to do with a small amount of petrol? You cannot reach your next stopping place, and there's nothing suitable in between. Then it jumps ahead a little bit. Eventually, with the load considerably lightened, you have another try. This time the plane moves forward a little more rapidly, and at last, after an agonizing few moments, the tail lifts and speed is gained. The end of the runway is in sight ahead, as are grass huts, petrol casks, and trees. Will she do it? It is touch and go. Staggering drunkenly, she lifts her wheels off the ground, and you struggle to hold her in the air, dipping a wing to clear a hut, making a crazy flat turn to miss a tree. And now, again, you are on your way.
Good stuff. That is
that.
the good stuff
Like
in that
that.
book.
And there
to
were
give
just a
it
few
credit.
passages like that in that book.
Yeah, there are. I mean,
Yeah.
But they
when
were
I got
good.
to them, I was like, "Oh, yay!" And
Yeah.
then
And then back to, so and so did such and such. Yeah. That wasn't her.
Yeah. Well, ladies, this has been a pleasure. Do we have anything else that we want to say or wrap up with about Amy today?
I'm just grateful that you chose Amy, or we did.
Yeah.
It got me into all of the, as always, I'm so grateful because it got me into all of these books. I learned more about all these women, and especially Amy Johnson. And I do have a better appreciation of her and see why she's revered. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank
That
you for obviously it's super fun to do this with you guys because you come into it from all these different angles, and then you are such incredible geeks. Like, oh my word. You are just book nerds and aviation geeks, and I absolutely love you both.
So do you want to know when you've reached addiction level of book collecting?
Do tell. I think I'm well past it, but go ahead.
Oh no. So this is what I learned can happen with addictions. I heard someone say this, that something begins as just something you enjoy doing, then it becomes a habit.
Yeah.
Then it can become an obsession and an addiction.
Yeah.
So top 10 signs you're addicted to book collecting. You purchase a book. It's in Chinese.
What is this book supposed to be?
Well, it says Women of the Sky. And
Right.
then when I ordered the book, it does not say this on the book, but when I ordered the book, the description said the agitation of a generation of women pilots.
The agitation?
Yeah. So it was obviously a weird translation. I'm guessing it meant the rise.
Yes.
I'm not sure what it meant to say, but that was the word that was used.
And is it about...
This is how bad this is. Are you ready? The entire book is in Chinese.
Yeah. Is it about Chinese
I do not
women?
read, speak, or understand Chinese.
Oh, well, but I totally get it. Like, I would totally buy something like that.
There are no photos. I was hoping
know.
maybe there's a photo like with a caption that has a year. No photos.
Okay, so if there's any
Well, this is
listener out there,
addiction level of book collecting right here.
yeah, maybe we can get a
I
Chinese
paid
friend.
$71 for that book, and it
Let's
was sent to me from China. Yeah,
Well, maybe we can get a Chinese friend to read it and give us a book report.
I got a
You got a bookmark for it.
Chinese bookmarker with it.
And it's about Chinese women pilots? Or
Yes.
Okay. Well,
I presume.
I want to know them. I want to know about them. So somebody out there who
I don't know when we'll be able to review this book.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we just need to find a Chinese friend to
join us,
read it, and then come on and give.
And we will listen to her talk because
we won't have anything to say.
But this is addiction level of book collecting right here.
You're winning. You're winning.
Yeah,
definitely winning.
Or losing. I don't know which. Yeah,
I don't either. Well, I think that's a great place to stop. You're winning. Yeah, that's a great place to wrap things up. Thank you, ladies.
Absolutely.